Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane pitches Michael the fixer to Claire, who is looking for illegal dirt on Audra. While Kane Ashby suggests that Michael Baldwin be his fixer, Claire Newman will look for illicit information about Audra Charles. Kane will meet Michael on the train and question whether his retirement was more about escaping Victor Newman's snares. Kane will confess that he needs a fixer to assist him when Michael asks him why they are meeting. Kane will want to make Michael a devoted team member because he knows how to accomplish things off the grid and doesn't mind getting his hands filthy. Until Kane texts him the starting wage, Michael will be cautious and almost leave this meeting. That will hold Michael's interest, but given that Kane is prepared to pay that kind of money, he will question whether a crime has been committed. Kane will withhold the information until attorney-client privilege is fully implemented, but Michael will want to know exactly what he would be mending. Kane will point out that Michael isn't saying no, but he also won't commit to accepting the position. Kane's generous offer is just the beginning, and all he asks is that Michael take it into consideration. When Audra discovers Claire has had some alcohol at society, she will make fun of it and think Holden Novak is using the same old Vespa cliché he employs with all of his ladies. Throughout this conversation, Claire will repeatedly refer to Audra as a bitch. However, Audra will persist and will highlight her nighttime meeting with Kyle Abbott. Audra will attack Claire when she makes fun of her unsuccessful career and the loss of Nate Hastings. Holden will be the one to seize Audra and prevent a physical altercation. In addition, Audra will bring up Claire's history as a poisoner and imply that, at the very least, she is not as pathological as Claire. If Audra doesn't back off, Claire will confront her and essentially warn that she could be dangerous. Holden will then take Claire to Crimson Lights for coffee so she can become sober. Claire will want to find a way to gain the upper hand, but Holden won't hold it against her for giving as good as she got with Audra. Claire will insist that Holden tell her what transpired with Audra in LA since she believes it was illegal. Claire will pretend that Holden's dubious past makes him more interesting, even though he will be unwilling to discuss it. On Thursday's episode of Y&R, Victor will be surprised with a romantic evening at the ranch that is filled with memories of their past by Nikki Newman. During their reunion, Victor will enlighten Nikki on his knowledge of Colin Atkinson's last scam, in which he will allude to Kane's involvement. Victor will emphasize that Kane's reputation will worsen if that son of a bitch doesn't comply with his demands. There will be many more lovely moments for these two since Victor and Nikki will finally dance together to celebrate their love. Kane Ashby had always prided himself on being a man who could find ways to survive, even when the odds were stacked against him, and now, more than ever, he needed someone who could maneuver the shadows with precision. That was why, after days of carefully weighing his options, Kane decided that the perfect candidate for his new plan was none other than Michael Baldwin, the legendary lawyer who had supposedly walked away from the chaos of Genoa City's backroom deals. Kane knew Michael wasn't just a lawyer, he was a fixer, someone who could bend the law without breaking it entirely, someone who could make problems disappear, and someone who understood exactly what it meant to operate within the thin line that separated legality from crime. The timing was risky, but Kane also recognized that Claire Newman was circling in her own storm, and she needed ammunition, specifically, illegal dirt on Audra Charles. That connection made everything more urgent. So Kane orchestrated a meeting, choosing a train as neutral ground, where the roar of wheels against tracks could drown out any hushed conspiracies. When Michael boarded and saw Kane waiting in the booth with a guarded but determined expression, his skepticism was immediate. Michael had retired, or so he told himself, but Kane challenged that assumption right away, slyly suggesting that retirement wasn't about escaping work but about escaping Victor Newman's snares. Kane didn't need to say much more, because the mention of Victor's manipulative clause was enough to draw a flicker of recognition in Michael's sharp eyes. As Michael sat, arms crossed, Kane wasted no time and admitted why he'd arranged this meeting. He needed a fixer, someone who could navigate situations off the grid, someone who could get his hands dirty when others wouldn't. Michael smirked, amused but wary, reminding Kane that lawyers usually ask their clients to keep their hands clean, not encourage them to stain them further. Kane leaned in, his voice lower but full of conviction, and explained that he wanted more than legal advice. He wanted loyalty, devotion, someone who wouldn't run at the first sign of trouble. Michael raised an eyebrow, asking bluntly what exactly Cain needed fixing, and whether this had to do with Victor, or Audra, or something darker. Cain hesitated, unwilling to disclose details until attorney-client privilege was firmly in play, but Michael wasn't about to be pulled into a mess without some clarity. He gathered his briefcase, ready to walk away, muttering that he'd left this world behind and had no interest in Cain's cryptic games. That was when Cain played his ace. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table, one that contained the figure of a starting wage so high it made Michael pause mid-step. The hesitation was everything Cain needed. Michael read the number twice, then sat back down, narrowing his eyes. If Cain was willing to pay that much, then this wasn't a minor matter. It was either crime already committed or crime about to unfold, and Michael wanted to know which. Cain only smirked, pointing out that Michael wasn't saying no, but he also wasn't saying yes, and that was enough for now. The money, Cain promised, was just the beginning. What he needed was for Michael to consider the offer, to weigh the value of returning to the game where he excelled. Michael folded the paper, slipped it into his jacket, and told Cain that he would think about it, but Cain could see the gleam in his eye. The man was intrigued, maybe even tempted. Elsewhere in Genoa City, the fire between Claire Newman and Audra Charles was heating up in public view. At society, Claire nursed a drink, her temper already fueled by a couple of glasses too many, when Audra spotted her and couldn't resist a jab. "What's this? Holden Novak trying the same tired Vesper trick on you that he uses on every woman?" Audra sneered, laughing at her own dig. Claire's patience shattered instantly. She called Audra a bitch, not once but repeatedly, her voice sharp with venom, and while onlookers began to shift uncomfortably, Audra only leaned in closer, as if feeding on the confrontation. Audra, with her razor tongue, reminded Claire of her failed career, her mistakes, and even brought up Nate Hastings, twisting the knife over the humiliations that still haunted Claire. Claire retaliated, mocking Audra's desperate scheming, which only fanned the flames further. By the time Claire made another vicious remark, Audra's hand twitched, ready to escalate things physically, but Holden intervened. He grabbed Audra's arm firmly, dragging her back before the situation turned into a brawl. That didn't stop Audra from getting in one final jab, this time cutting deep by referencing Claire's history as a poisoner. "At least I'm not pathological," Audra hissed, making it clear that Claire's past sins were never far from memory. That accusation lit a fire in Claire's eyes, and she warned Audra in a voice so cold it sent shivers down Holden's spine. If Audra didn't back off, she could make things very dangerous. Holden immediately stepped in, ushering Claire out of society and over to Crimson Lights, where she could sober up with coffee. As they sat, Holden tried to defuse the situation, telling Claire she had given as good as she got, and there was no shame in that. But Claire wasn't done. Her mind was already spinning with schemes. She demanded that Holden tell her what had happened with Audra in Los Angeles, certain that whatever skeletons lay buried there could become the leverage she needed. Holden tried to brush it off, insisting it wasn't something she needed to know, but Claire pressed harder, smiling slyly and claiming his dubious past only made him more fascinating. The tension between them pulsed, unresolved, leaving Holden torn between protecting his own secrets and satisfying Claire's hunger for power. Meanwhile, across town at the Newman Ranch, Nikki Newman had prepared a surprise for Victor, decorating the evening with candles, old photographs, and music that carried the weight of decades together. When Victor walked in, his eyes softened at the sight, romance and nostalgia wrapping around him like a cloak. They danced, they reminisced, they shared laughter and tenderness, but amid the warmth, Victor's sharp instincts couldn't resist discussing business. He spoke of Colin Atkinson's last scam, his tone heavy with implication, and he alluded to Cain's involvement, though without naming details. "That son of a bitch better fall in line," Victor growled, reminding Nikki that Cain's reputation would deteriorate even further if he refused Victor's demands. Nikki tried to pull him back into the light of their evening, reminding him that tonight was about love, not war, but Victor's mind was always balancing both. Still, they shared their dance, swaying together with a rare gentleness, proof that even in a world filled with schemes and betrayals, some bonds remained unbreakable. Michael Baldwin left the train with the slip of paper tucked neatly inside his inner jacket pocket, but his thoughts were anything but neat. For years, he had prided himself on being able to walk the razor's edge, never quite falling to the wrong side but certainly tempting fate more often than any lawyer should. Retirement, at least the kind he had embraced, was supposed to mean quiet nights with Lauren, dinners that didn't involve whispered secrets, and mornings without phone calls from desperate clients begging for miracles. Yet Kane Ashby had found a way to yank him back toward the current, and the number on that paper was enough to stir something Michael thought he had buried: his hunger for relevance, for being the man people turned to when their world was crumbling. As the train screeched into the station, Michael tightened his grip on the handrail, weighing his options. If Kane was telling the truth, this wasn't about paperwork or strategy. It was about crossing lines that most lawyers feared to even glance at. He had to know more, though, before making a decision. And so, even as he boarded his connecting train, Michael made a silent vow. He would find out exactly what Kane wanted fixed, and if the risk outweighed the reward, he would vanish again before Kane realized he was never coming back. Meanwhile, Kane sat in the booth long after Michael had left, sipping at a lukewarm coffee that had long since lost its bite, replaying every word of their conversation. He knew Michael's interest was piqued. The man might posture, might threaten to walk away, but Kane had dangled the bait perfectly. All he had to do now was wait, and in the meantime, make sure Claire Newman stayed on track. Claire was fire and ice, capable of flipping from charming to vicious in a heartbeat, and Kane had learned long ago that unpredictable allies could be as dangerous as enemies. Still, Claire had value. She wanted Audra Charles destroyed, and Kane knew that if they could coordinate their agendas, Audra would have nowhere left to run. What he didn't anticipate, however, was how volatile Claire could be when alcohol was involved. Reports of her spat with Audra at society were already circulating, and Kane grimaced when he overheard two businessmen at the bar chuckling about how the Newman girl nearly tore Audra's hair out. Kane muttered a curse under his breath. The last thing he needed was Claire drawing public attention to herself when discretion was the key to their plan. At Crimson Lights, Holden Novak sat opposite Claire, his brow furrowed as he pushed a steaming mug of coffee toward her. Claire, still prickly and restless, tapped her nails against the table and demanded again that Holden spill whatever dirt he had on Audra from his Los Angeles days. Holden sighed, his jaw tightening as if he was wrestling with invisible chains. "Claire, you don't know what you're asking," he muttered, leaning closer so the nearby patrons wouldn't overhear. "What happened in LA wasn't just messy, it was illegal. If I tell you, you'll have to live with that knowledge, and trust me, it won't give you the satisfaction you think it will." Claire smirked, tilting her head, eyes glittering with mischief. "Illegal? That's exactly the kind of word that makes me interested, Holden. You want me to keep looking at Audra like she's untouchable, like she's some slick operator who's always 5 steps ahead? No. I want leverage, and if you're sitting on a gold mine of her secrets, then you're doing us both a disservice by keeping quiet." Holden clenched his fists under the table, recalling memories he had spent years trying to bury: nightclubs, forged documents, and one particularly dangerous business deal that had nearly cost him his freedom. He knew Audra had her fingerprints all over that scheme, but admitting it now would not only implicate her, it would drag him down with her. "Drop it," he said finally, his voice like steel. But Claire wasn't one to be dismissed. She leaned across the table, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "One day, you'll tell me. And when you do, Audra won't know what hit her." Holden shivered, not from fear, but from the undeniable magnetism of Claire's relentless determination. Back at the Newman ranch, Victor swirled a glass of brandy in his hand as Nikki nestled beside him on the sofa. The romantic evening had softened his edges, but business was never far from his mind. "Kane Ashby," Victor said quietly, more to himself than to Nikki, "thinks he can maneuver without consequences. He thinks I don't see the strings he's pulling. But I do." Nikki frowned, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Victor, not tonight. We had such a lovely evening. Please don't ruin it with schemes and threats." Victor kissed her forehead but didn't relent. "My darling, I cannot ignore threats to this family. Kane has his hand in something. Colin's last scam is proof enough. And if he doesn't align with my interests, he'll find himself buried under the weight of his own lies." Nikki sighed, recognizing the familiar gleam in Victor's eyes, the one that said he was already planning his next move. She knew better than to argue when her husband was in this mode, but a small part of her worried what storm was about to descend on Genoa City. Over the next few days, Michael Baldwin began his own quiet investigation. He didn't confront Kane directly. Instead, he made a few discreet calls, contacted some old connections, and listened closely to whispers in the undercurrent of Genoa City's gossip. What he found disturbed him. Kane's interest in Audra Charles wasn't personal alone. It was tied to Claire Newman, and together, they seemed poised to dig into things best left untouched. Michael knew Audra was no saint. Her record was littered with betrayals and shady dealings, but she also had powerful allies. Taking her down wasn't just risky, it was dangerous, especially if Victor Newman had any reason to see Audra as valuable. By the time Michael returned home, Lauren was waiting, her expression sharp as she asked him what trouble he was walking into now. Michael tried to dodge, claiming it was nothing serious, just an old acquaintance making an offer. But Lauren knew him too well, and the unease in her eyes was unmistakable. "Don't do this," she warned softly. "You've worked so hard to build a life beyond the shadows. Don't let Kane drag you back in." Michael kissed her cheek, promising to be careful, but in his heart, he knew he was already in deeper than he should be. At the same time, Claire's obsession with finding leverage grew. She replayed every word Audra had thrown at her, every insult, every reminder of her poisonous past, and she vowed that Audra would pay. Claire began lurking around society, eavesdropping on Audra's conversations, pressing Holden for more details, and even considering hiring someone who could do digging that Holden refused to. It was dangerous, reckless even, but Claire thrived on the adrenaline. She told herself she wasn't spiraling, that she was being strategic, but deep down she knew the line between strategy and self-destruction was blurring. Holden tried to talk her down, reminding her that going toe-to-toe with Audra could backfire, but Claire brushed him off. "I'd rather burn everything down than let her win," she hissed one night, her eyes blazing with fury. Holden, exasperated, muttered under his breath, "You're going to get us both killed." Meanwhile, Kane received a coded message on his phone. Michael was willing to meet again. This time, Michael chose the venue, an abandoned courthouse that was rarely used except for storage. The irony wasn't lost on either of them as they sat in the dusty chamber where justice was supposed to be blind. Michael leaned forward, his tone clipped. "Before I agree to anything, I need to know exactly what you want. No vague promises. No riddles. If you want me to be your fixer, then I need to know what I'm fixing." Kane studied him for a long moment, then finally spoke. "I want to take down Audra Charles. Not legally. Not with lawsuits or corporate maneuvers. I want her exposed, dismantled, ruined, and I need someone who knows how to cover the tracks when things get messy." Michael's jaw tightened. "You're talking about blackmail, Kane. You're talking about digging up dirt, maybe fabricating it, and destroying her reputation. That's not fixing. That's warfare." Kane didn't flinch. "Call it what you want. But Audra's dangerous, and Claire Newman wants her gone. I want her gone too. With your skills, it's possible. Without you, it's not." Michael exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had been many things in his life, lawyer, husband, father, schemer, but fixer was the role he had tried hardest to abandon. And yet, here he was, standing at the edge of the abyss again, tempted by the thrill and the promise of control. "I'll consider it," he said finally, his voice heavy. "But Kane, understand this. If I step back into this world, there's no halfway. Either we win, or we both go down in flames." Kane smiled grimly. "Then let's win." The courthouse meeting lingered in Michael Baldwin's mind long after he and Kane went their separate ways. Kane's words echoed like a challenge. Either we win, or we both go down in flames. That kind of ultimatum was the stuff Michael used to thrive on, but now it felt heavier, the stakes far more corrosive. Back at his condo, Lauren could sense the restlessness in him. He poured himself a glass of wine but barely touched it, pacing as if rehearsing arguments in his head. Finally, Lauren pressed him, her voice sharp but laced with worry. "Michael, you're not fooling me. Kane Ashby doesn't call you out of the blue for small favors. What's he dragged you into?" Michael clenched his jaw, hesitating before admitting. "He wants Audra Charles ruined. Completely dismantled." Lauren's eyes widened, and she set her glass down hard on the counter. "Audra? Michael, that's suicide. She's dangerous, she's tied to Newman, and if Victor even suspects you're involved." Her voice trailed off, but the unspoken threat was enough. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, though his own confidence was shaken. I haven't agreed. I'm considering. Lauren pulled away, furious. No. Don't consider. Walk away now. You're playing with fire. But Michael, haunted by the adrenaline of the old game, couldn't quite promise that. Across town, Claire Newman's obsession tightened like a noose around her. Every time she caught sight of Audra, at Society, at Newman Media, even passing through the Grand Phoenix, she felt the sting of humiliation and the burn of rage. Claire replayed their encounter over and over, the poisoner jab slicing deepest. She told herself it wasn't about insecurity, it was about justice. Audra had thrived by manipulation and deceit, and if Claire was going to carve out her own future, she had to destroy Audra first. Holden Novak, meanwhile, found himself cornered again when Claire stormed into his suite, her eyes wild with determination. Enough games, she hissed, slamming her purse on the coffee table. Tell me what happened in Los Angeles. I'm done waiting. Holden stood at the minibar, pouring himself whiskey, his back turned. Claire, I told you before, it's not something you want to know. Don't patronize me, she shot back. I'm not some naive little girl. You think I can't handle the truth? I've survived worse than anything you could possibly confess. Holden turned, glass in hand, his expression haunted. You don't get it. If I tell you, you'll use it. And once you do, there's no going back. Audra won't just strike back, she'll destroy you. And she'll take me down right alongside you. Claire smirked coldly. Maybe. Or maybe we finally put her in her place.